It was a typical Saturday when I decided to take a hike. The weather was clear, and the air had that fresh crispness to it, the kind that makes you feel alive. I'd been cooped up in my apartment for a while, working non-stop, and the thought of getting out into the woods was exactly what I needed to clear my head. I didn't have a specific trail in mind, just a quiet, remote spot where I could enjoy some solitude. I grabbed my backpack, packed a few essentials: water, snacks, a map, and my phone, although I wasn't expecting much reception, and headed out. I drove for about an hour, eventually finding a small parking area that was mostly empty. A couple of cars were parked, but it didn't look like the place was overrun with people, which was exactly what I wanted. The trail I picked out on the map seemed like it would be quiet and peaceful, far enough away from any busy spots. The first few miles of the trail were easy. The path was wide, with tall trees lining both sides, their leaves forming a canopy that shielded me from the harsh sunlight. Birds chirped high above, and I could hear the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was beautiful. I took my time, stopping to snap a few photos of the scenery, but the deeper I went into the forest, the more I began to feel a shift. It was subtle at first, just a slight sense that something was off, but nothing I could put my finger on. The further I walked, the more isolated I felt. There were no sounds other than the rustling of leaves and my own footsteps. It wasn't that I was scared. I wasn't one of those people who jump at every little sound in the woods. But there was something about this place that felt quieter, like the forest itself was holding its breath. About 2 hours into the hike, I reached a section of the trail that got a bit steeper. The trees here were older, their trunks thick and twisted, their branches gnarled. The trail was narrower, winding its way through the dense underbrush, and the air felt heavier. There were still no other hikers in sight. I hadn't seen anyone in the last hour, and while I wasn't worried, the silence felt unnerving now, like I was the only one left in this forgotten corner of the world. I kept pushing forward, telling myself that it was just the solitude making me feel this way. The further I went, the more it felt like the forest was swallowing me whole. My steps were slower now, as the terrain became uneven, with roots sticking up out of the ground and rocks scattered across the path. I had to be careful not to trip. Then, I saw something strange. At first, I thought it was a pile of rocks, just a random accumulation of stones on the side of the trail. But as I got closer, I realized that it wasn't a natural formation. The rocks had been stacked deliberately, one on top of the other. It looked almost like a small tower, about waist-high, with no real rhyme or reason to the way they were arranged. I stopped in my tracks and stared at it. It wasn't something you usually see on a well-traveled trail. It was too intentional. My first instinct was to turn around, to head back the way I came, but then I shook my head. There was no reason to be paranoid. It was just a pile of rocks, after all. Probably just someone passing through, leaving a little mark, or maybe even some kind of trail marker. But that's when I noticed something else. There were small pieces of fabric caught between the rocks. I crouched down for a closer look, and the fabric looked old, faded and torn. It wasn't the kind of fabric you'd expect to see in a place like this. It looked out of place. I couldn't explain it, but it set me on edge. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I suddenly felt very aware of how alone I was. I stood up quickly, looking around. The forest seemed even quieter now, if that was possible. The air felt thick, almost stifling. I tried to shake off the feeling creeping up on me and decided to keep moving. I'd seen plenty of strange things on hikes before, but for some reason, this felt different. I kept telling myself that it was nothing, just an odd coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I walked for another half hour, but the trail was becoming harder to follow. It was getting less distinct, the markings on the trees more faded, the path less clear. At one point, I realized I had lost track of the trail entirely. I pulled out the map, but when I tried to get a sense of where I was, the landmarks didn't line up with anything I recognized. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I was lost. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. I wasn't worried yet. Plenty of people got lost on hikes, and I had my water, food, and map. I just needed to backtrack. But when I turned around, everything looked different. The trees seemed thicker, more tangled, as if they had grown closer together in the time it had taken me to walk through this section of the trail. I had walked straight for miles, and yet the landscape didn't feel like it should have. I should have recognized something by now, but nothing looked familiar. I felt a slight panic beginning to rise in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't in immediate danger. I would find my way out, but the more I looked around, the less I was sure of that. The trail that had once seemed so clear now felt like it was actively hiding itself from me, leading me deeper and deeper into the forest, away from where I had started. I decided to stop for a moment to collect my thoughts. I found a large rock off to the side of the path and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to figure out what to do. I looked around, scanning for any kind of landmark, any sign that could help me get my bearings. That's when I noticed something strange, something that sent a cold shiver down my spine. There was something moving through the trees. At first, I thought it was just another animal, but when I focused, I realized that it wasn't. The shape was too big to be a deer, and it was moving too deliberately. It was following a path through the trees, weaving in and out of the shadows. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could make out the vague shape of something large and dark. My heart started to pound in my chest. I couldn't explain why, but I had an overwhelming urge to get out of there. I stood up quickly, my mind racing. I had no idea what that thing was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was dangerous. My instincts told me to run, but I knew that wouldn't be wise. I didn't know the terrain well enough to risk running blind, and besides, I couldn't outrun whatever it was. I tried to backtrack, but as I moved, the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just paranoia. It was as though the forest itself had taken notice of me, like it was aware of my presence and not particularly happy about it. I turned around, and for a split second, I thought I saw something darting behind a tree. That's when I knew I needed to leave. Fast. I took a deep breath, forced myself to stay calm, and began walking in what I hoped was the right direction. Every sound seemed amplified now, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the snap of a twig in the distance. I didn't dare look behind me again. I just kept moving, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. After what felt like hours, I finally stumbled upon a trail marker. It was small but familiar, one of those little signs you see on trees that indicate you're still on the right path. I followed it with renewed determination, but even as the trail became clearer and the forest seemed to open up again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I made it back to the parking area. My car was still there, and I was alone again. I could feel my heart still racing in my chest, but I didn't care. I was out. I had made it back, and the strange presence in the woods had stayed behind. I drove home in silence, grateful to be safe, but the memories of that hike lingered. It wasn't the physical danger that bothered me. It was the feeling of being so completely alone in a place where nothing made sense. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that whatever I felt out there in the woods wasn't just in my head. There was something watching, something aware, and it didn't want me there. The sun was already high in the sky when I set out, making the early morning chill quickly fade into the warmth of the day. It was a Saturday, the kind of Saturday that begged for a quiet hike in the woods, far away from the stress of city life. I'd done this trail before many times, so I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Just a few hours in nature, listening to the sounds of the forest, maybe a bit of wildlife, but mostly peace. That was the plan, at least. The trail started at the base of a small mountain, winding its way through thick trees. Pine and oak, I think, tall and dense enough to block out most of the light, creating patches of deep shade across the path. I liked that. The dense woods felt like a blanket, wrapping you up in a kind of quiet solitude. My boots crunched against the gravel of the path, the sound mixing with the occasional bird call. The air was thick with the earthy smell of wet soil and pine needles. I was about half an hour in when I realized that something felt off. It wasn't anything major at first, just a slight feeling of discomfort, like something was a little too quiet. The birds were still chirping, but there was an odd stillness, like the forest was holding its breath. I shook it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. It was just the isolated environment messing with my mind. Nothing more. The trail was familiar, a loop that would take me up to a viewpoint and then back down the opposite side of the mountain. I had hiked it several times before without issue, always taking my time to enjoy the scenery and stretch my legs. But today something felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed denser in places, or the slight chill in the air that never quite went away. Whatever it was, it didn't feel like the trail I had hiked so many times before. I kept going, pushing the feeling to the back of my mind. The path narrowed as I moved higher up the mountain, and the trees began to thin out, revealing occasional glimpses of the valley below. The higher I climbed, the more the sounds of the forest seemed to fade away. The wind was lighter, almost non-existent, and I couldn't hear the usual scurry of small animals in the underbrush. There wasn't even a rustle of leaves, just silence. Eventually, the path led me to a small clearing with a rock outcrop where I usually took a break. The view from here was always worth the climb. A sweeping panorama of the valley below, the distant mountains towering over everything. I dropped my backpack onto the ground and sat on one of the rocks, taking in the sight. But even as I looked out over the valley, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as though the world had tilted just slightly, and I had crossed into a place where things didn't quite line up the way they should. My mind kept racing, trying to figure out what it was, but nothing came to me. I was just being paranoid. I pulled out my water bottle and took a long drink, trying to calm myself. The heat was starting to build up, the sun bearing down on me, but there was no breeze to keep things cool. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand and stood up to stretch, feeling the tightness in my legs from the climb. My heart was beating a little faster than normal, though, which I found odd. The sensation of unease was growing, but it wasn't enough to stop me. I decided to keep going, reasoning that if I didn't finish the loop, the day would feel incomplete. The trail would eventually loop back around and take me back down to the base. All I had to do was keep moving, get through the rest of it, and I'd be fine. The next section of the trail was steeper. The rocks beneath my boots grew slick with moisture from the morning's dew, making each step a little more precarious. As I climbed higher, the trees became more sparse, the underbrush thicker. It felt almost claustrophobic. The sunlight didn't reach the trail as much now, casting everything in a deep, shadowy gloom. The silence was suffocating. I had no idea how long I had been climbing at that point. An hour, maybe more. But my legs were starting to burn. My body felt like it was shutting down, the fatigue setting in. I pushed through it, just focusing on the next step, the next tree, the next rock. The path had narrowed again, and now it seemed to be winding through a series of thick bushes and tangled branches, making it harder to see where I was going. I felt a sudden prickle of unease crawl up my spine. I froze mid-step, straining to listen. There was nothing. No rustling, no chirping, no distant calls of wildlife. Just the sound of my breath and the occasional creak of the branches above me. It was as though everything around me had gone still. Even the wind had stopped. I took a few more steps, my heart starting to pound in my chest now. The oppressive silence weighed on me, making me feel like I was being watched. The strange sense of dread that had been building in me since the beginning of the hike was now undeniable. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to rationalize it. The silence was just a quirk of the trail. Maybe I had just reached a part of the mountain where the wind didn't get through as easily. Maybe the wildlife was farther away, hiding out of sight. But even as I tried to tell myself that, I knew deep down that something wasn't right. I glanced over my shoulder, scanning the shadows between the trees, but there was nothing, just the deep, suffocating forest. I decided to press on, faster now, desperate to reach the top. The climb was steeper here, and the ground was uneven, making it harder to keep my footing. Every step felt like a struggle, but I couldn't stop. I had to finish this. I had to get back to safety. It felt like an eternity before I finally reached the summit. I collapsed onto a large rock, my chest heaving with exertion. From up here, I could see the entire valley, the town in the distance, the winding roads that led back to civilization. For a moment, I let myself breathe, trying to calm my racing heart. The fear had subsided just enough to make me feel like I could take control of the situation. But as I sat there, taking in the view, something caught my eye. Off to the left, deeper in the forest, there was a figure, a silhouette. It was too far away to make out clearly, but I could see it standing still, just watching. I froze, my stomach sinking. The figure was standing completely still, unmoving, its shape too blurred to make out clearly. I didn't know who it was. I didn't know why they were out here, but I knew something wasn't right. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get down, to leave, to go back down the trail the way I came. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from that figure. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at it, but eventually, I stood up, heart pounding. I turned and started heading back down the mountain, careful not to trip, my legs already burning from the descent. The figure was still there when I glanced back, standing motionless, but now it was much farther away, tucked between two trees. The rest of the hike down was a blur. My thoughts were racing, and I barely noticed the ground beneath my feet. I just wanted to get back. I just wanted to get out of the woods. It felt like hours before I finally reached the base of the mountain, my legs shaking and my heart still hammering in my chest. When I stepped out of the tree line and into the open, I didn't stop. I kept walking until I reached the parking lot, my car in sight. I didn't look back. I didn't even slow down. When I got into the car, I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together what had happened. Who was that figure? What were they doing out there, watching me? I still don't have an answer, but whatever it was, I knew I wasn't going back to that trail. Not alone, anyway. I didn't want to take any chances, and I never saw anyone else on that trail the entire time I was hiking. Not a single person. It's a popular spot, and it was a Saturday. I should have passed someone on the way up, or at least heard someone in the distance. But there was no one. Not until the summit. I don't know if I'll ever understand what I saw or if I'll ever go back to that mountain. But one thing is for sure. That feeling I had, that heavy, suffocating sense of dread, I won't ever forget it. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was wrong out there. I'd been hiking for hours, my legs burning, my body drenched in sweat. It wasn't a particularly difficult trail, but it was long. I had started early, just as the sun was rising, hoping to reach the summit by noon. The weather was perfect, clear skies, a slight breeze that cut through the trees, and the sun warm on my back. But as the hours ticked by, the world around me began to shift. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a slow, gradual change. The birds seemed quieter, the wind rustling the leaves less frequently. Even the trail itself started to feel different, as if the ground beneath my feet had become uneven, less forgiving. The path twisted, narrowed, and the dense forest began to close in around me. I had planned for this hike for months. I checked the maps, read the reviews, talked to people who had done it before. Everyone said it was a great hike, beautiful views, and well-marked trails. No one had mentioned anything about how it felt, as if the woods themselves were watching. It was a weird feeling, but it crept up on me. At first, I tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to the exhaustion setting in. But as I continued deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was wrong. The trees were taller here, their trunks wide and ancient, their branches twisting like gnarled hands reaching toward the sky. The underbrush had thickened, and the trail had all but disappeared in places, leaving me to scramble over rocks and roots. I checked my watch. It was almost 11 a.m. I hadn't stopped for long, just a few quick breaks to drink some water and eat a granola bar. My pack felt heavier with each step, and I was starting to regret not bringing a trekking pole for support on the steeper parts of the trail. Then I heard it. Something moved in the bushes off to my right. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I had been so focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trying to keep my mind off the growing unease, that I hadn't noticed the sounds of the forest had gone still. It was too quiet. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. A sharp rustle came again, closer this time, followed by a low growl. My eyes darted around, trying to spot what had made the noise. I hadn't expected animals on the trail. Sure, there were deer and squirrels, but nothing like this. The growl came again, closer now, and I could almost feel the vibration of it through the ground. It wasn't the type of growl I'd heard from any animal before, though more like the sound of something that didn't belong, something that was out of place. A sudden shiver ran down my spine. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It's probably just a bear, I told myself. I read that they're often around this area, though it's rare to see one. But still, the sound, it wasn't quite right. I stayed still, straining my ears. The noise came again, this time much closer, and I couldn't help but take a few steps back. Whatever it was moving toward me, and I had no intention of finding out what that was. I turned around, deciding to retrace my steps to the last clearing I'd passed, hoping that I could find a better route or perhaps a way to safely get out of whatever was coming for me. But when I turned back, the forest had already started to feel different. The trees were denser now, their trunks larger, closer together. The sunlight seemed to grow dimmer, as if the trees themselves were blocking it out. I hadn't noticed the shift in the environment at first, but now it was unmistakable. The air felt heavier, as though it had grown thick with moisture. The path, which had been so clear earlier, had vanished completely. I had wandered off the trail. Panic gripped me, and my mind raced. I had no cell service out here, and my GPS couldn't get a clear signal. I should have paid more attention to the signs along the trail earlier. There were markers, flags, something to show me the right direction, but now it all felt wrong. The trail was gone, replaced by an endless, tangled mess of trees and undergrowth. I had no idea where I was anymore. I began walking faster, my boots crunching over the dry leaves and twigs. Sweat dripped down my forehead, and I wiped it away with the back of my hand. I needed to find the trail again. I had to find it before I got deeper into this wilderness, before the day turned into night. The last thing I wanted was to be out here alone, in the dark, with no way to navigate or shelter. Then, without warning, the noise came again. This time closer than before. The growl rumbled through the air, low and ominous. I felt it in my chest, a deep vibration that made my heart race. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It was something different, something wrong. I whipped my head around, but I didn't see anything. Just trees, just shadows. My breath came in ragged gasps as my mind raced. I couldn't stand still any longer. I had to get out of here. I turned and began running, ignoring the pain in my legs, the way my lungs burned. I had to move, I had to get back to the trail, and I had to get out of this cursed part of the forest. The underbrush thickened the further I ran, and I found myself stumbling over roots and rocks, my feet slipping in the soft soil. My heart pounded in my chest, and my panic began to rise. The noise came again, this time unmistakable. A low growl that seemed to come from all around me. The forest had become silent again, too quiet. I felt trapped. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the growl stopped. I paused, frozen in place. The silence was deafening. I strained my ears, hoping for a sound, a sign that I wasn't alone. My chest heaved with each breath. Then I saw it. A flash of movement through the trees, just a blur. I snapped my head toward it, my heart leaping into my throat. I wasn't alone. I had no idea what it was, but it was there, and it was watching me. I turned and ran faster now, my legs moving almost on their own, driven by fear. I pushed my way through the thick forest, each step bringing me further away from whatever had been following me. But the deeper I went, the harder it became to see. The trees closed in around me, blocking out the sunlight. The air was colder now, and my breath came out in visible puffs. Minutes or maybe hours passed. I didn't know how long I had been running. The panic began to fade, replaced by exhaustion, but still I pushed forward. Eventually, I stumbled into a small clearing, and I froze. There, in the middle of the clearing, was the trail. The real trail. I had found it. Somehow, after running in circles, I had stumbled onto the right path, and I could hardly believe it. My legs felt like lead, my whole body aching, but I could see the markers on the trees, the familiar signs that led to the summit. I didn't care how long it took to get there now. I didn't care if I was late. I was getting out of this forest. I took one last look around, just in case, but there was nothing. No growls, no sounds. Just the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I didn't wait any longer. I started walking briskly, keeping my eyes trained on the path in front of me. I made it to the summit by 2 p.m., the exhaustion from the long hike hitting me hard as I finally saw the panoramic view of the mountains stretching out below me. It was peaceful up here. The air was thinner, the wind sharper, but I felt safe. I was out of the woods, literally and figuratively. I pulled out my water bottle and took a long drink, letting the cool water soothe my dry throat. As I sat down, catching my breath, I thought about the strange experience. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Had I imagined the growls, the sense of being followed? I didn't know, but one thing was for sure. I wouldn't be coming back to this trail. Some places are meant to be left alone, and this one was definitely one of them. And so, with a sense of relief and finality, I packed up my things and started the descent back to the base.